So good morning, everyone. Welcome to our BNC June meeting. I am Janice Ching, and I will not be moderating today. Chris Kroll will be moderating, but I am just sharing the agenda for today because we had some last minute changes. I want to thank the AC Transit representatives for coming and giving a presentation today. So we had them down for 35 minutes, but if you guys want to go 20, that's fine. And then we have Tony doing a presentation on the growth of planned parking in West Berkeley. And then we have Zelda Bronstein to present about zoning changes for research and development in our city. And then we have Peter Radu giving a report on the City of Berkeley homeless response. And then as a last minute addition, we have someone from the Insurance Commissioner's Office who will be coming. So I'm hoping that we're gonna fit her in for a 15-minute presentation somewhere in this agenda.
I just told her 11:30, Janice. So.
Okay, perfect. So we're hoping that Peter will do his presentation at 11 is what we're thinking, and then have the insurance meeting, insurance presentation at 11:30. Okay, so I think that's it. Chris, you can take it away.
Yeah, so we'd like to welcome Ryan Lau and Robert Del Rosario, who have come to talk about a major change at AC Transit in how the bus system through the East Bay is.
Maybe you should listen to this. This is AC Transit, how they're changing the route.
How the AC Transit system is going to be organized in the East Bay, and so we appreciate very much that Ryan and Robert have shown up, and I guess Robert, you have a PowerPoint to share with us, so you are co-host, so you can share your screen and start your presentation. Good. And welcome to both of you.
Appreciate that. So the lion's share of this will be Robert's presentation because I know nothing about planning. So my name is Ryan Lau, External Affairs Representative at AC Transit, joined here by Robert Del Rosario, Director of Service Development and Planning. I think this is the first time I've actually gotten your title correct. So next screen.
Can you see full screen, Ryan?
Yeah.
And everyone's okay, great.
So just a quick intro. So we are California's largest public bus-only transit system. This is really a slide just to kind of demonstrate how big a footprint in the East Bay we are. We're running around 3 million trips per month. We serve primarily people of color and low income. So 75% of our riders are people of color, 65% are low income. 43 are transit dependent, meaning they need to rely on the service to go to work, go to doctor's visits, and the like. And I think that is my intro. And so I think almost the rest of it is all Robert Del Rosario.
All right, thanks, Ryan. So thank you again for having me. My name is Robert Del Rosario, Director of Service Development and Planning for the district. So this slide, you have the existing route network. So that for those of you familiar with riding transit service in the Berkeley area, you can see some key routes here and to orient yourselves. This is the campus, and then downtown is right here along Shattuck. And so you can see a lot of the routes are hub and spoke type of routes, meaning they're radial and they start in downtown Berkeley and work their way outwards, either to the hills or to North Berkeley or to parts south and West Berkeley. So what is Realign? So as you all know, we the world went through a major pandemic about 4 years ago, over 4 years ago. And since then, transit operators throughout the world, and especially in the US and especially in the Bay Area, actually, have had a really hard time recovering from the impacts of the pandemic. And we want to look at what are the travel patterns happening now post-pandemic, considering that there are changes in work patterns, changes in daily routines for our riders, So we want to better capture what our network should be doing in wake of the pandemic. I do want to point out that this is a cost neutral service plan, so meaning that we're not cutting service, but we're reallocating it. Hence the term of the name of the plan. So if we want to improve a route here, maybe increase the frequency of it, we do have to find another place in our service area to make reductions.
Service, what the hell?
And so we're aligning our service with our customer needs and equity goals as much as possible, and I'll go over those equity goals in just a second. So what isn't realigned? So realigned is just looking at our network, right? So all of our routes, our schedules, what time they start, what time they end, what days they operate. There's a whole other need at AC Transit to help with getting the service up and running each day. And these are some of the things that won't be included in Realign. So we just want to make sure it's clear that it's focused on the network and the service itself. So our goals in creating this network, we want to make sure we get feedback from the public and shape the future of our bus network, really reflect how people are traveling today. And the service can get people where they want to go. But we also have to remember that we're working within our constrained resources. So it is resource and cost neutral, as I mentioned. So that's not only the dollars. We have a balanced budget closing out this year. And then we're just about to get an approval with our board for a balanced budget next year. But then we might see some financial deficits in years to come beyond that. So that's one piece that makes us cost neutral. But the other piece is that we are having challenges with keeping up our operator resources. And so, even before the pandemic, we had the silver tsunami fear coming, looming over our operator workforce. And that's since been an issue. So the pandemic, I think, increased that retirement clip a little bit more. And so we're just having challenges with hiring operators these days. So the guiding principles, there are 3 that the board of directors approved for AC Transit. We got a lot of feedback from all sorts of stakeholders on this. So one is equity. So we want to make sure that we serve the communities that need it most. Reliability. So if we're putting a schedule out there, we want to make sure that we're meeting that promise of that schedule and trying to be as reliable and predictable as possible. And then frequency. We know that frequency is an important factor in determining if one's going to take public transit. And so the less waiting time and the more often the bus comes, the more likelihood people are going to rely on it for their daily needs. So we did a lot of data collection as part of the Realign plan. One of the things that we looked at are what are all the travel patterns going on in our region. This slide shows what happened in I think the pandemic period all the way up to 2022. The dark blue is where ridership went down significantly. The light blue is where it went down less significantly. The white, or I guess it's like a gray area, is where it roughly stayed the same. And then the yellow is where it actually increased. So if you're, we don't have it on the map here, but if you look at, say, around the campus area, you'll see a lot of yellow because we've seen a lot of ridership growth there. But what we've generally seen here in the Bay Area since the pandemic is that the trips are generally the same. The biggest changes are less travel into the downtown centers, so less travel into San Francisco, less demand going into downtown Oakland. So those make sense because those are primarily office space areas where people aren't going to work on a 5-day schedule anymore, and so we're seeing less demand there. But we have seen some pockets of increase. Again, I said the Cal campus neighborhood trips are also up. So meaning people need to get to their appointments or to school or to the supermarket. Those types of trips seem to be increasing ever since the pandemic. So with Realign, we've had multiple iterations go to the board. Our first one was in January. And then the board took action in March and we made adjustments. And then we recently went to the board again on June 5th with even more revisions. So I'll talk through those really quickly. and what was included in each. So in January 2024, we tried to build a balanced coverage scenario. We brought two scenarios forward to the public for review, and the balanced coverage scenario is the one that seemed to be resonate most with people who saw the plan, and that's basically spreading our resources more evenly across the district and not necessarily focusing more on trunk lines, and so trying to maintain as much coverage in the district as possible. We budgeted some resources for additional running time and layover time to improve the schedules of the routes. And then we applied the guiding principles as best we could with incorporating feedback from the public. So why are these elements important? Of the guiding principles, the community members emphasized the need for reliable service, and they also wanted a frequent transit network. But that's also in what we call equity priority communities. So these are communities where there's a number of factors that show more need in these areas. So that's income, race, car ownership, environmental impacts on these neighborhoods. So we want to make sure we serve those, but we also want to serve non-EPCs and really create a whole network for the entire AC Transit region. So we heard all of the plan feedback. We also communicated with our operators for that first round of plan and came up with the recommendations. So then we made revisions based upon that January plan, and we heard back from our board and the public. So we broadened our frequent network. The board did not want to see routes go to 20 minutes on some of these key trunk lines, and you can see those in bold here. We improved reliability. We looked at which routes are performing under 70% on-time performance. So our goal for AC Transit overall is 72%. So we thought, okay, let's look at the ones that are not performing to our standard and see how we can improve those. And then we were going to tune some frequency for efficiency. So if we can get some savings here and there to try to get the larger improvements that the board was looking for, then we would go ahead and do that. So as a result of the March plan, our coverage, our frequent network coverage went from 22% in our January plan, and then we increased it by 10% more in our revised March plan, which is great. So what that means is service to a frequent network service, which is 15 minutes or better, to 166,000 more people in our service area, 48,000 more people of color, and 38,000 people who are 200% below the federal poverty level. So really trying to extend the reach of where you can get frequent service. So on improving reliability, we saw 8 lines from our fall data that showed on-time performance as under 70%. And just by quick definition, on-time performance is the percent of time that a bus is arriving to a time point. So we had different time points on our schedule. So it's a percent of time it's arriving on time. So we have some challenges out there, but we definitely want to improve them. So the proposal for these routes would be to add an additional bus into the schedule, which also requires operators to drive that bus. And that allowed us to increase the frequencies. Of course, we had to make changes and make reductions in other routes in order to improve the frequency on these routes. And then we wanted to work with the bus operators to make sure that we can improve the layover time where possible. So meaning that the layover time is when the operator gets to the end of the line and they get enough of a break so that they can turn around and operate their trip and their return. So in terms of tuning the frequencies and what that means for getting efficiency, we have a route operating at, say, 60 minutes. And we know that we can squeeze some resources out of it if we go to 62 or 63-minute frequency. Then we would go ahead and do that. So a minimal change in the frequency, but we get a resource savings and we're able to plug that back into more reliability or frequency improvements elsewhere. So here's a map of our frequent network. Berkeley is pretty well served with a frequent network. Here's downtown Berkeley right here by this downtown Berkeley BART station. So of course we have a number of frequent routes, the 18, 51B, the 6. So all really, San Pablo, of course, is also a frequent corridor. So lots of lots of frequent service in the Berkeley area. This is what the network that we're proposing as of March, and also brought to our board in June, and some of the changes that we're proposing. So I'll go through these quickly, particularly the ones that affect Berkeley. So local lines 72 and 72M on Sao Paulo would each operate at every 15 minutes. And the rapid, which operates at 12 minutes a day, would go down to 30 minutes. And that's an overlay service. And so that's a place where we thought we could find some resources and allocate those elsewhere for other improvements. And we also looked at the loads on the buses on the 72s, and we saw that this level of service could be accommodated without having any type of standing loads on the service. So in Northern Alameda County, some of the new things and features that we're excited about with this plan that are coming are new service on Alcatraz. We haven't served Alcatraz probably in 20 years is my guess. But it is a corridor that's a missing piece in the network, and so we want to bring that back. Serve Brooklyn Basin with Line 96. Line 96 is an Alameda route, and it goes into East Oakland. There's a new Brooklyn Basin development. It's not new anymore, but a huge development that you'll see off the 880 freeway that we want to serve with our transit service. We would continue service on Ashby. We provided that as a pilot service about 2 years ago, and it's been wildly successful. I think seeing like a I don't know, it's like a 500% growth or so in the ridership along that corridor. So super excited about that. Line 19 would be extended via Broadway. This is an Alameda route, less relevant to Berkeley, but serve at Broadway to serve the Kaiser airport, Kaiser Hospital. And then the rest are Oakland recommendations, which I will not necessarily go through. So I do want to talk about one of the major changes that we're proposing for some of the trunk lines in Berkeley. So right now, the 6 and the 51B are trunk lines that go into downtown. The 6 travels down Telegraph into downtown Oakland, and the 51B is on College Avenue, serves the south side of campus. But that ends at the Rockridge BART station, which is here in a red box. And then if folks are willing, or if folks need to continue on College Avenue or down the Broadway corridor, they have to transfer. So those of you who have remember our old AC Transit network, we used to have a continuous route along the 51, and we broke it into 2 pieces because of reliability issues and trying to just get the route on time. But we're proposing to piece those back together, and I'll show you that in the next slide. So the proposal for the 51B would be that it would continue beyond Rockridge BART, and you'll see it's a straight line, the green one, and goes all the way down Broadway into downtown Oakland, and then it'll lay over at the Lake Merritt, terminate at the Lake Merritt BART station. So folks in Alameda, they want to have this connection to the Broadway corridor going into Alameda's, and so we're going to take the line 19. And then operate that along the Broadway corridor all the way up to Kaiser, so that Alamedans will have a 1-seat ride. And then the portion of Santa Clara and Alameda would be served by line 6. So you pretty much do a swap of the 51AB connection, and now line 6 is the route that goes all the way into Alameda. What we're trying to do here is just have more connections for folks, really have that continuous spine along College Avenue with service. We would eliminate that transfer, which has been something that we've heard from our riders for many, many years since we split the route in 2, about how it's difficult to transfer and cross the street on College Avenue, which is a busy street, to get to the other bus. So that would go away. But also we get to free up some layover space as a result of that. And so layover space, as I mentioned, is where our operator takes a break, and it's important for us to get the space for those buses to park while the operator is taking a break. And so this allows us to do that. Central Alameda County, I don't think I need to go through. Those are Hayward routes. And if there are any questions about Central Alameda County or Southern Alameda County, I'm happy to take those, but I can skip through those. I do want to briefly touch on Transbay. We do have a reduced Transbay network right now. It's the routes that we're operating are the ones that are listed, but there are a number of routes throughout the network that we're not serving right now. And those will continue to be suspended. So we're basically going from suspended routes to permanently canceling those routes. Lines L and LA are, I think a portion of it goes through Albany, We will be combining those routes to get some efficiencies. The OX and W also serve similar areas in Alameda, and we will combine those two. So really keeping our Transbay network pretty much the way it is today, which is at a very low level when you compare it to pre-pandemic. So I think those are all the recommendations, and I'll turn it over to Ryan to talk about outreach, and then we can circle back for questions. Thank you. Ryan?
Yeah, thank you, Robert. So next slide. So I will cover this a little bit more in depth later, but basically we are wrapping up this phase of public engagement. So we will take this time from basically now until somewhere in August 7th, I think is when our next actual meeting is. So our planning team is going to be working through all of the feedback that we've received in this phase and sort of better digesting it, making tweaks to the proposal. And then we will be coming back to the board August 7th, which we will be asking the board to basically set the public hearing. We will have a series of public hearings, 4, I think, in total on the 9th, 10th, and 11th. One of those days we'll have an AM and a PM public hearing just to make sure that we're capturing the full gamut of feedback from people with different types of schedules and the like. And then I believe we're closing the public hearing sometime in October. We're going to do another round of sort of digesting that feedback that we've gotten through that public hearing process, and then doing further tweaks. And then we will have the expectation to implement in March of 2025. Next slide. So this is sort of the all of the different outreach that we've done in this phase. Obviously, we had a digital component with the project webpage, social media, e-news, and the like. We also did a round of announcements at city council meetings, municipal advisory committees, which basically oversee the unincorporated areas. We had paid advertising and then advertising on our buses and such. We've done a couple of Realign workshops, one on the 23rd and one on the 5th, which was this past Wednesday, as well as partnered with community-based organizations to ensure that we're sort of reaching specific populations that might otherwise be a little bit more challenging to reach through the sort of traditional methods of outreach. We also had throughout the East Bay at 21 libraries, actual physical books of all the route profiles along with comment cards, and we just recently collected all of those. Next slide. I think the next slide is basically what I covered in the timeline, but yeah, so again, this is basically a visual articulation of what I described earlier. So we just wrapped our disengagement phase. We're going to be coming back for setting and opening the public comment period for the public hearings. And then again, September 9, 10, and 11, we'll have 4 different public hearings. And then we'll have we expect to have a board vote on October 9th. And I think that's the end of the presentation.
Great. Can we go to questions? Yeah. All right. We do have a lot of questions, so I wanted to thank Robert and Ryan, and then if we could go to Zelda. You've had your hand up for quite a while, so if you could unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Hi. Thanks for that presentation. Some of the changes look good to me. I actually watched the board's hearings in January, and one of the things that struck me was the testimony of bus drivers from the union about the lack of their concerns about their safety. 2 kinds of concerns, both dealing with some of the passengers and also COVID and concerns. And I'm wondering, how has AC Transit addressed those concerns? Or, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so definitely legitimate concerns from the bus operators. So COVID safety, the first thing we've done is put in a physical barrier between the bus operator and the passengers coming onto the bus. So that's been one thing. Increased presence, just working with our police department partners as well as our own ALCO, Alameda County Sheriffs, to help with that. But it's been a real challenge. We're also looking at environmental safety improvements. So what can we do in terms of where the buses lay over and the operators take their break? What are the safest locations for that? But it's been really challenging, especially when you look at the evening times. We still want to provide service to our riders. But how do we do that but also keeping our operators safe? The last thing I'll also point out there is that sometimes the bus drivers have to change shifts, and so they change shifts in the evening. We try to bring those back so that they don't happen after 8 p.m. Is one thing, and then we try to pick good locations where they can make their changes in shifts.
Thank you. So Kelly, you have a question in the chat, but do you want to just make that in person now, since you also have your hand raised?
Sure. I had two questions. One is, do infrastructure changes like platforms and dedicated lanes make a difference in ridership? And then the other question was, what do you consider like a well-used route? You know, like what occupancy on the bus?
Sure. So the first question is definitely a yes. There's been lots of studies out there that have shown that what the platforms and the lanes do is that it improves the reliability and speed of the bus. And so now that you have a more reliable service that you can count on to get to your destinations and get there a little quicker, then that would increase the ridership. So definitely our International Boulevard project is an example of that, where we've seen tremendous ridership growth. So yeah, that's definitely a key factor in there. And then number two, success. So we measure it more in number of passengers we can get for an hour of service. So they call that passengers per revenue hour. The benchmark for our service is about 20 passengers per revenue hour. And just to put that in context, something like International Boulevard has 60 passengers per hour. But then, a hill route may get 12 passengers per hour. So that's really our benchmark. And then in terms of ridership, we want to, I think routes that are successful, probably the median is somewhere around 1,000. So anything more than 1,000 is above our median, and anything below is, and that's for a day. So.
Thank you.
I
Tony?
did want to just,
okay.
Sorry. So Chris, I wanted to follow up on that really quickly, and thank you for that question, Kelly. I think it's important to note that because we're a special district, we actually have no control over the right of way. And so that requires us to work closely with our municipal partners. So basically the city of Berkeley dictates what we're able to do in their right of way because they own the right of way. And so if we want to see infrastructure changes, we have to work closely with them, and the policymakers have to buy into that vision. So I thought that was an important.
Yeah, thank you for that. Tony, you're next.
Thank you, Robert, for that excellent presentation. Hi, Brian, nice to see you again. I'm a Clipper card holder, and I try to ride the bus as much as possible, but unfortunately where I live, which is Dwight and 10th, the bus service here is pretty poor. There's every half hour there's a bus that goes to downtown Berkeley, which I like to ride. But generally West Berkeley is not well served. And I hope one of you sticks around for my presentation, because I'm going to cover the troublesome growth in commuter car parking in West Berkeley. And we really need to do something about that. And one of the ways we can combat that for GHGs and dangerous collisions with bicycles, pedestrians, and general congestion problems is to increase bus service in West Berkeley. So I'd like you just very briefly to say the changes in the Southwest Berkeley lines. There used to be, I think, an 80. I've taken that a couple of times, and just just cover very briefly some of the service changes along 6th and 7th and Ashby Avenue, et cetera.
Yeah, I can touch on those really quick. So you're currently served by the 36, which is the line that travels along Dwight. And so what we want to do with our service in Berkeley is make sure that all of the major east-west roadways are served. So Alcatraz, Ashby, Dwight, University, Cedar, Gilman, and then Solano, right? So that's kind of half-mile spacing. So we're trying to accomplish that as best as we can. And then north-south, we want to get all of the trunk lines, and those are a little more obvious, San Pablo, Sacramento, MLK, Shattuck, and then I think it's Telegraph, and then College. So we've accomplished that with this proposed network to make sure that all of those corridors are served. And so anything in addition to that would have to come from resources elsewhere. And I know you brought up what's going on 6th and 7th. So we have service, I think, on 6th and 7th, but only south of Dwight. We don't have anything north of Dwight, which is where the 80 used to operate. The hard part with that is that portion of the old 80 just didn't have the ridership, unfortunately. So it's difficult for us to consider bringing that back when we know that the ridership may be stronger if we put those resources elsewhere. So we're trying to really hard to establish this 30-minute grid, particularly in the flatlands of Berkeley, with more frequent trunk lines and then less frequent service as you go into the hills.
So we do have to move on. So we have time for 2 more questions, but there is a question in the chat, Robert, is all door boarding on the table, and what is the current fare evasion rate?
Yeah, great question. I don't have the numbers on fare evasion, and primarily because we charge fares on some routes, and then we have pilots for all door boarding on other routes. And so there's an all door boarding pilot on the 51B and the 6, I believe. So you can actually board the bus on the back door. So the results of that are going to determine if we can expand it throughout the system. There's definitely interest from the public stakeholders and some board members about that. I think we have to think about what would the evasion rate be if we did this system wide. And then 2, what type of enforcement do we want to have? We're already short on resources, and I think we have some challenges with other safety issues with our service that were earlier mentioned. And so can we dedicate significant resources to making sure that people are paying their fares if we do go to all door boarding? So something on the table, but not really a timeline for it yet.
Okay, Meryl?
Thank you. And I want to really thank AC Transit for the incredibly great outreach you did and the multilingual outreach that occurred at the meeting, the first meeting that I saw. I'm not sure if it was at the second meeting as well, the first meeting with the planners and such. So the question that I pose is a difficult one, and we can all see that you're trying to really negotiate a difficult hand here. I am guessing what we are seeing on the 52 is not an anomaly with AC Transit. And so what we're seeing on the 52 on Cedar Street is a bus that has maybe a high ridership during the UC Berkeley school year, between 8 to 10 and maybe between 5 to 6. And then the other times of the year on Cedar Street, the bus is it's an accordion bus and it's pretty empty. We understand that there are times when it gets crowded on the rest of the bus route, right? It takes a right on Sacramento, and then it goes down University. So the question, for planning is, especially because this is an accordion bus, so it's very heavy, and a lot of diesel fuel is wasted. I mean, this is like climate change and all this and that. We're in a climate corridor. So we're wondering as a community, is it at all possible? I mean, can we think creatively, and could AC Transit work with the city to kind of, have a different bus route where it starts getting super crowded on University. Okay, and that's one other way to think about it. So that's a question that came up because the data shows, and people have cameras here, that the buses are running empty. And we do want to thank AC Transit for really working on the weekends to right size the bus for weekend ridership. So that's our question. And we've been kind of asking this for a while. It requires a different kind of headset. 15 minutes, every 15 minutes running an empty bus is not a benefit for a community. So how can we get through this? How can we figure this situation out?
Yeah, I know this has been something that's come up for a number of years. Meryl, I know that we've talked throughout the years. It's trying to figure out what our best use of resources are. And we do have very, very high demand, maybe the highest in the region, of taking kids from UC Village over to, or not kids,
That's not
students
true.
from UC Village over to the campus. And for many years, we had this service tied to Cedar Street. So what we're trying to do here, and I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, is try to get this grid network of service that's half-mile space going on the east-west routes in Berkeley. So Cedar Street's one of them that we want to serve. But of course, routes have to do multiple things. And so while we're also getting Cedar service, which we feel is important to provide, we're also getting the service on campus. And so we do acknowledge that there is high peak ridership, and then there's less off-peak ridership. And we're looking at ways that we can change the vehicles on weekends, as you mentioned, the off season. So now, right, summertime, we don't necessarily need DR ticks out there. But generally, there are heavy loads that go from you to the campus.
Okay, I just have to jump in, and with all due respect, people have cameras out there. I do not. And there hasn't been high ridership. It's not especially during the peak ridership. It's only about 2 hours. So how do you collect your data? Because and there's also online classes now. So
yeah, we're happy to.
It's not high ridership.
We're happy to pull the data, and we can share it with you offline.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
We do have to move on. Paula, do you have a quick question? Because we really need to move on to the next item on the agenda.
So, a real quick comment and question. So I'm one of those people who doesn't have a car. I do depend on AC Transit. Thank you very much. I'm very fortunate to live on MLK, so I'm very close to a bus stop. However, and I do rely on the 511. Oh my gosh. But I have noticed that I guess how consistent are the schedules? Because it could vary between 5 and 10 minutes sometimes, or 3 minutes. So just kind of how consistent are the routes to the schedules? Thank you.
Yeah, that is a really good question. So our overall on-time performance is about 75%. So that means 75% of the buses arrive to their time points on the schedule on time. And then the rest of the time they're late, hopefully not early. So we're okay. I mean, for an urban environment, we can definitely do a lot better. And the things that we're trying to do are make sure that we can fill all the runs, and so no missing runs. And once you have missing runs, then that's when things start to fall apart. And then try to improve the break time for operators, as well as improve the running time. So it's a work in progress, and I think we've been upward trending. But yeah, there's definitely work to be done there.
What is the break time for drivers? Is it 10 minutes? Is it 20 minutes? Because I also take the 98 from the Coliseum, and
yeah.
It's crazy to me to see how long I'm waiting for the driver to get off their break.
Yeah, they vary. There's a formula in the contract with our bus operators. So depending on the length of the route, then you get a commensurate break time. But we try to give pretty healthy break times out there for the operators. It's such a hard job.
So it's 15 or 20 minutes or half an hour?
So just the rough rule of thumb, if it's an hour-long route, that's about a 10-minute break. If it's like an hour and a half, that's more like a 15-minute break.
Okay.
And then some of them are higher.
Okay,
Thank you.
we have to stop. We do have to move on. Ryan or Robert, could either one of you leave maybe an email address? Because there are a lot of other questions that maybe people could follow up with you. There were questions in the chat, so I don't know if either one of you is able to leave in the chat and address people to address it. That'd be great. And I just want to thank you both so much for coming on a Saturday and joining us. We really appreciate the time, and that was really helpful in understanding the realignment process and what's going on and how it's going to move forward. And I thank you both for joining us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And Tony,
Thank
you
you.
are, we're moving on to Tony. So Tony, you're going to talk to us about the growth in
Yes,
your
Janice,
parking.
you can display the map, okay?
Yeah.
Okay,
And,
so I have two slides, and the first one is handmade, not digital, because the city no longer has an interactive zoning map on the site. And I hope you all will join me in demanding that the city restore an interactive zoning map. Okay, Janice, can you put it up? Thank you. Okay, this is somewhat blurry because it was hand done. But it's a map of West Berkeley. It's the zoning map of West Berkeley. So you don't have to see much. I'll just explain it by color. So the red lines are CW, otherwise known as Commercial West, along San Pablo Avenue and Lower University Avenue. The darkest blue is the MUR, mixed use residential. The middle blue is the Muley, mixed use light industrial. And the lightest blue is MM, manufacturing zone. The main point I want to make about the map is that West Berkeley is a neighborhood. Approximately 10,000 people reside in this area, approximately 3,000 each in the R1A, which is the yellow, which is a purely residential area. It is 3,000 in North R1A, which is usually called Oceanside, and about 3,000 in what I call Mitiera, which is where I live, and about 4,000 people live in the blue zones. So can we go back to that? I'm sorry, Janice, but I have to go back.
I'm sorry, it shifted on me.
I haven't counted the current residents along CW, but about 10,000 people live in West Berkeley. That's the most important thing to remember. It is a neighborhood. So looking at the black dots from the north to the south, these are the R&D developments that I'm going to look at today solely on the parking. These are very complicated developments, and I'm not going to cover everything. I'm just going to look at the parking. So from north to south, we have the proposed Gilman Forge. That's on the old Pacific Steel site. Okay, and then going south of University Avenue, we get to 600 Addison Street, which is also called the Berkeley Commons. It's on the north end of Aquatic Park on Boulevard Drive. And just for your information, Boulevard Drive is a park road. It is not a city street. It's considered under Parks and Waterfront and Recreation Waterfront Division. It's a park road. So that is under construction, and it's about 4 months from completion. And to my knowledge, they don't have a tenant yet. That's something to see. You really have to go down and see it. The lab is a very complicated development. It's on both sides of 4th Street, and it is 2213 4th Street and 787 Bancroft Way. 2213 4th Street is under construction, and it's nearing completion. And 787 Bancroft Way has demolished the buildings that were formerly on the property, and now it looks like a vacant lot. Then moving south again, we get to 600 Bancroft, which is also on Boulevard Drive, but it has a Bancroft Way address. And the old buildings have been purchased, and the developer has submitted plans that are not yet public. They did give a presentation at the April Parks Commission meeting, but I don't believe that they showed any slides. They merely made a verbal presentation. The next dot to the south is the 46-acre Bayer campus. It is continuously under development since the first 30 years development agreement with the city in 1991, and has been extended for another 30 years. The entrances to those properties are along 7th Street. And the last dot is 700 Grayson. It's 742 Grayson and has been used temporarily as a homeless and RV shelter. It will be known as 700 Grayson after the old building is demolished and a new facility is built. The plans are available in the design review staff reports. So some of these plans are more easily found than others. Unfortunately, the city website has been redesigned to make access to planning documents more difficult. It took me many hours of work just to get the information that I am presenting today. So take a look at these locations because they're going to the next slide. Okay, what I looked for were the number of parking places, and that is my focus here. First of all, the main use of these developments is R&D, research and development, mostly in the life sciences. If you want to explore that use further, I suggest getting an expert in the field to make a presentation, as it is the primary growth industry in Berkeley and Emeryville. And I think it's really important for us to understand the nature of this industry from all aspects of it. I am presenting this information about parking on the basis of the construction completion. And so it's a little different from the dots. I'm not going from north and south. I'm going from what's been built or not built, okay? So let's go to Berkeley Commons first. That's the one on Boulevard Drive and Aquatic Park. Oops, I didn't get the TI in there.
Oh, sorry.
It includes two parking garages for a whopping 943 vehicle spaces that are west of the railroad tracks. That's important because dozens of trains pass every day, meaning cars will be backed up with their engines running. There are two garage entrances, one on Bancroft and one on Addison. And also bike lanes are planned on Lower Addison, which means the chances increase for bike-car collisions. The lab is also under construction on two sides of 4th Street. And includes a 415 space garage that's nearly complete. And I think it's a very well-designed building, by the way. For a parking garage, it looks really handsome. It has a kind of a steel mesh exterior. It's very nicely designed. And there will also be a 75 vehicle space on the open lot at the north end of that, that will be developed. That whole block will be developed, and there'll be a 75 space vehicle space. All of these places, by the way, have bicycle parking. I didn't look at that. I'm just looking at car commuting spaces. 742 Grayson will be known as 700 Grayson when it's done. It's gone through design review, and you can look for it at the design review staff report. And the plans are available there. The project includes a 7-story parking garage holding 325 spaces next to the railroad tracks. And it's across from the south end of the Bayer campus. The entrance to the south end of Bayer is on Grayson opposite that location. Bayer's 30-year development agreement has been extended for another 30 years. The campus along 7th Street now holds 1,100 parking spaces, which will be increased another 725 for a total of 1,825 parking spaces. The open air lots that are at the base of Dwight Way and 7th, that area is called the Dwight Crescent, by the way, will be developed into parking garages. I think 2 or 3 stories. I'm not sure. I didn't have a chance to check the height of the parking garages. So that's another increase. The number of parking spaces is 600 Bancroft, will be revealed when the plans are submitted. And the Gilman Forge, which is an application pending, they want to build 3 7-story parking garages for a total of 1,850 spaces. So that's a lot of parking spaces in the pipeline, over 4,000, and that doesn't include what 600 Bancroft is going to suggest. So what does this mean? First of all, the city has not calculated the GHG, that is the greenhouse gas emissions, for these additional car commuter trips, nor the impacts on intersections and streets. No holistic or programmatic traffic study has been done for West Berkeley since the EIR of the West Berkeley project, including the master use permits that were denied by the voters in the defeat of Measure T in 2012. It's reasonable at this juncture that the ratios of square footage of development to vehicle spaces be adjusted to lower commuter trips, and that a holistic programmatic traffic study be done, including intersections and streets along 6th and 7th and all of the east-west streets, Addison, Alston, Bancroft, Channing, Dwight Way, Ashby, and in between, which go through residential neighborhoods. And the MUR, by the way, is a mixed residential neighborhood, mixed use residential. A lot of people live in the MUR. So this is not only a problem for our climate policies, but it's also for the health and safety of residents, pedestrians, and cyclists. And that's the end of my presentation.
Oh, I was muted. Sorry. Thank you, Tony. Thank you for all that research. And I know it is difficult to use the city's website to do this kind of research. So thank you very much. We do have one question from Bryce. Bryce, if you want to unmute yourself and go ahead. You're muted, Bryce. You're still muted. Still muted.
Why don't you read his question, Chris?
Let me. I didn't see it. Is it in the? Yeah. There is no question from Bryce in the chat. There's just a statement about the Charles H. Spear House was demolished for the lab after the individual who wanted to move the house failed to meet deadlines. It's not a question. So, and then he has a link to an article. So I'm not sure what Bryce's question. We do have Maria. Maria, if you could unmute yourself, could you ask your question?
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, good presenter. That's a lot of work and I appreciate it. I happen to have many interactions with that particular area, especially with regard to homeless people and people parking in RVs, etc. So I'm just curious as to why the city or the plan is to invest so much money in more car parking when A, we're trying to get away from car driving. So many people need survival essential housing. So I'm just, we're going to end up in the direction we're headed unless we change our direction. And I, care about people surviving. And I know part of that is for people to be employed and have safe parking. But I'm just wondering why this focus is the way it is. Thank you.
That is a very complicated question that requires a very complicated area. And since we're short on time, all I can say is the basic problem is leadership. We simply do not have leadership in the city of Berkeley that is coherent. We have a compartmentalized intellectual discourse where people are not clear about their goals and motives. So it's complicated, it's political. This is a political problem that we have in Berkeley, and we have to solve it by political means.
I know, which is why I'm involved in commissions and on boards, and Margot Smith is here. We're doing our best from the bottom up to affect this change, but at least I needed to comment on the fact that, you know, I don't get into my car and drive blindly and then wonder why I get into an accident. I really support more awareness as to the choices that we're making. And I understand greed and money making and etc. I understand, but I just thank you for your heart and soul. Thank you for each of us that care. And I really want the hippies to rise up again. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, unless it's, oh, I see Bryce is back. Bryce, we'll try you again. Can you unmute this time?
Testing.
We're still having the same problem. There's some problem with your audio.
Try one more time. Bryce?
Testing. I'm there twice actually, so I'm joining from a completely different device.
Can you type your question into the chat?
If you can put it into the chat, thank you. Yeah.
You're echoing now.
Just type.
Okay, is the audio working now?
Yes, it is. Go ahead.
Okay, so I did put into the chat a map of all Berkeley development projects in the pipeline. It's a Google map. It includes not just the lab, but all of the residences. And I'd like to point out a parking opportunity. So the peak use of all of those garages is Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 for those people who do work in person. Those garages then sit empty at night. Blocks away, often across the street, are residential developments that are going in where the peak use of that parking is overnight. There's an opportunity through city planning to put a lot less spots in for the same capacity, much more flexibly. And this was actually pioneered in a small city in the East Bay of California, Berkeley actually, by a project called Library Gardens, which had one of the nation's first combined residential and public parking garages. It's the development with the balcony that fell near the library. And there's opportunity here to create what's called district parking, where you share parking lots between uses, thus having less land use devoted to parking. And I think that's something that the planning department hasn't brought up at all and would require some leadership on the city part. I encourage people to look at that development map and think about how parking lots could be combined.
Thank you, Bryce. You know, I did business in Great Britain for 20 years. I used to run theater tours to London, and I had a friend who was an architect, a British architect, who took me all around the country in his car. And one of the things that Britain does is to pedestrianize the historic city centers. And they use a system, they call it a scheme, and British use of the word scheme actually translates the system in our, but they have the scheme called Park and Ride. And they have these parking garages, and people are forced that they're not allowed to drive into the city centers, you know, because a lot of these cities are, you know, centuries old, and they can't handle car traffic, and people park for free in the Park and Ride garages, and then they ride the buses into the city center for shopping, etc. And I agree with you. I think that these garages, we should look at actually using them for municipal purposes and allow people to park there and have shuttles So to relieve the residential areas of Berkeley from the car traffic that's going to be generated, anybody who lives in West Berkeley knows you cannot drive anywhere during rush hour because 6 and 7 is so packed with cars, and it's going to get just worse and worse.
Yeah, we really have to move on. Peter Radu is here, and we also have 2 other presentations. So I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to say we can't have any more questions. But
It's just a quick comment, just a quick comment.
Quick comment, okay.
Yeah, we really need to think, as Tony said, not just among us, the city of Berkeley, but also regionally with ACTC, the Alameda County Transportation Commission, because it's going to be very difficult on I-80 and with San Pablo, with the slowing down of traffic in El Cerrito, Richmond. I don't know about Richmond, but El Cerrito, and the slowing down of traffic in Oakland, Emeryville. And then it's going to impact San Pablo and then Sacramento. So regional discussions on this need to happen, and they are not. Thank you so much, Tony. That was terrific.
Yes, thank you, Tony. And we do have a follow-up with Zelda. And Zelda, you said you need like 5 minutes. Is that correct? It's not a long presentation.
It might be a little more longer than 5 minutes. Your timing, I'll do what I can. I'm going to be as quickly as possible.
Yeah, because we have Peter lined up as well.
I know you do,
yeah.
but I know you do. But
you are likely a good follow-up to Tony's presentation.
That's exactly what I was going to say, that Tony's talk was an excellent lead-in to my presentation. So this is about the so-called Keep Innovation in Berkeley program, which was, there was an informational hearing at the Planning Commission on May 1st. I stumbled on this issue. I went to that meeting, not because of that item, but because Bernard Marzalek and I have formed a new nonprofit called the Berkeley Public Eye, and its purpose is to film meetings of the Planning Commission, which are not filmed. Right now, the only public records, official public records, are action minutes, motions made, votes taken, and the staff presentation. There's no way to know why the commissioners are doing what they're doing. Well, we actually might know, but we don't have a record of what they say or what their rationales are. So that's why I was at the meeting, because that was our first video. It's online on our new YouTube channel. You can search Berkeley Public Eye, and you will see the recording. I think it was about 3 hours long. I can't remember. Bernard, I think, is on this call. And if I say anything, if I miss something, I hope that he chimes in. Okay, so what's keep innovation in Berkeley? This comes from a 2022 council referral. It was authored by Rigel Robinson, co-sponsored by the mayor, Taplin, and Kate Harrison. And here's the problem as they see it, and the staff is totally in line with this. And this really speaks directly to the stuff that Tony was talking about. UC professors and graduate students are starting new businesses, R&D, research and development, but especially biolabs. That was the big emphasis at the Planning Commission meeting. They want to be close to campus or to Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, but they're having trouble finding space in our built-out city. Of course, the term built-out was not spoken by anybody at the meeting. So what's the remedy for this? Oh, right, and what is happening is, this is putting Berkeley at a competitive disadvantage because these startups are going to other cities, nearby cities that have more space and fewer restrictions. The council referral offered Fremont as a model for Berkeley, which is totally absurd. If you look at Fremont in terms of the size of the city, it's crazy. Fremont wasn't mentioned in the staff report on May 1st, but many other cities were. So how are staff, this is planning and also the Office of Economic Development, how are they planning to remedy this so-called problem? 2 ways. They want to remove restrictions on biolabs. There are federal, and I'm only telling you what I know. I have no expertise beyond really on this. It's pretty much what was presented at the meeting. Federal government rates has what they call biosafety labs. Do I have that? Levels, 4 levels. The lower the level, the safer. BSL1, no problem. BSL2, and you're working with biological organisms, special handling, need to be stored, handled in special ways. The Berkeley zoning ordinance references BSL2 labs in the mixed-use light industrial and the mixed-use residential zoning. I don't have the numbers right there, but if you go to our website, you'll see we attached the agenda, and the numbers on the ordinance, the passages are in the staff report. Currently, BSL2 labs cannot be closer than 500 feet from residences. Staff wants to eliminate that restriction. Why? Well, no, nobody else has it. Also, they're claiming that, how do they put it? BSL2 labs are, quote unquote, ubiquitous on the UC campus within 500 feet of student residences and classrooms. Lots of inspections. Absolutely no data was provided as to how often, the result of those inspections. Was it from the university? What's the city's health department doing? Nothing. Okay. Oh, so what they want to do then is couple other things. They want to make BSL2 labs, and maybe R&D in general, I think, yes, under 20,000 square feet, permanent with a zoning certificate. That means no public hearing. Just cross the board. But there's more. They also want to authorize by right for R&D biolabs under 20,000 square feet on commercial corridors, San Pablo, University, and Telegraph. And I appreciated Tony's map. I haven't presented a map. You know what? There were no maps presented at the Planning Commission meeting. I went online, I looked at the zoning, what's now online, 2022 data, it's probably outdated, for Berkeley. It's also really small, and you can only expand it up to a certain point. It's pretty clear, even so, that these commercial corridors, San Pablo, University, and Telegraph, they're backing up on housing, on residential neighborhoods. My impression is that neighborhood associations were given no notice about this, but maybe they should have been, huh? They might be concerned. So the most concerning thing is obviously safety, but there are other issues. At the Planning Commission meeting, staff said that these businesses are engaged in proprietary research. They're in competition. They're doing stuff that is secretive. So they're going to be drawing the shades. They don't want members of the public looking into their windows. That will kill commercial streets. It deadens the ambiance. There's nothing to see. It's dead. Was that brought up? No. Do planners care about that? Apparently not. Another factor, gentrification. This was a factor when the West Berkeley plan was devised and implemented. And I happened to get on the Planning Commission in 1997, which was right when the West Berkeley plan was being implemented. What's the problem? Light industrial and artisanal businesses cannot compete with labs and offices in terms of rent. They cannot pay the same rents. That's why the West Berkeley plan sought to limit research and development in West Berkeley. And I want to make another point, and this is right, still in the goals of the MULI, the mixed-use light industrial district, in the zoning ordinance. Specifically says one of the goals is to encourage employment for people who do not have advanced degrees. Well, what our city is now doing is proposing to actually make it harder for people without advanced degrees to get work in West Berkeley. Because the people coming from out of the university, the profs and the graduate students, they have lots of advanced degrees. And I said at the Planning Commission, I'm going to say it now, I have nothing against advanced degrees. I have a couple myself. That's not the point. The question is, what kind of a city do we want Berkeley to be? And apparently, it's just in terms of what's happened on South Side and downtown, City Hall wants Berkeley to be rebuilt in the image of the university. What else do I have to say? Oh, yes. So what are the advantages? Well, the references to community wealth and citywide benefits. Again, no data. Well, they mentioned the millions of dollars in grants that the R&Ds are getting, these startups. But how that moves, trickles down, if it does, to the community at large, nothing. At the May 1st meeting, maybe actually it was the next agenda, there was an announcement that on July 26th, the Planning Commission would have a special meeting, a public hearing on a new ordinance that would create, what would they call it? West Berkeley Research and Development Innovation District. At the meeting earlier this week, the Planning Commission meeting, they said that that meeting was going to be, that item was going to be postponed. No new date given. But they want to move forward on this. So what is to be done? Well, the West Berkeley Artisanal Industrial Companies Organization is apparently defunct. To me, this means that neighborhood associations need to take up this cause. I want to comment on something Tony said. She said there's nothing coherent. From my perspective, it's very coherent what's going on in the city. It's all to advance the university's interests. The university seems to be the major constituent for City Hall, all too coherent. I helped to lead the fight that defeated Measure T. That was a council initiative to upzone most of West Berkeley for multi-block office parks. We're getting them anyhow. I confess, I pulled back. I haven't watched, I haven't participated. I'm really angry about what's going on, not only in this, but at large. So that's my presentation. How did I do in terms of time?
You did great, but we're running really late, and we do have another speaker, but we do have a question from Paula. Paula, can you ask your question quickly?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Zelda. You mentioned that at the very beginning of your presentation that Roger Robinson, Kate Harrison, and the mayor were behind some legislation. Roger Robinson is no longer there. We now have Cecilia Luna Parra and Igor Tregub on the city council, both UC Berkeley grads. All three of them UC Berkeley grads. What role can these two new city council members play? And, you know, how does this reflect on Kate Harrison and her run for mayor? Any ideas, any concepts? Thank you.
Well, I'm not going to comment on Kate Harrison's run for mayor. That the fact that people graduate from the University of California, in my opinion, has nothing to do with their politics or the ideology. Absolutely nothing. You have to look at, and it's also Taplin, who's all for this still. And I think I'll say one thing, and this I'm not going to comment on Kate's candidacy. Exactly. My take is that Sophie Hahn is going to be elected mayor, and that's because Kate could not, the candidate she endorsed to succeed her in her district came in 4th. And if she can't even get her candidate to get into the runoff, how's she possibly going to run for? So I think we need to think in terms of Sophie. I have no idea what Sophie thinks about West Berkeley or biolabs. I'm not hopeful. She is not, in my experience, a brave legislator. However, that's what we have right now. And the others, Igor also, to get along, go along. Not my take with Cecilia, but I don't know her very well. That's my response.
Thank you. Tony, is it really quick? Because we have Peter waiting to talk to us. So is it really quick, Tony?
I just want to comment on Zelda is correct. Measure T, and thank you, Zelda, was defeated by West Berkeley. It was an attempt of the city council to force certain pattern of development on us, and we defeated it.
Barely.
And yeah, it was a very, very, very narrow voice. And you're absolutely correct that it's being accomplished anyway in a piecemeal fashion.
Yes.
And I have a lot to comment on the politics, but I'm not going to because we're short of time. But thank you, Zelda, for all your past work, and hopefully you'll jump in again.
Thank you both, actually. And I do hope we can revisit both your topics at a future meeting, because this is an ongoing issue and we're so tight on time. It's not fair to these issues that really need a lot more discussion. So thank you both for coming. I really appreciate it. And with that, I want to also thank Peter Radu for coming here. Peter has agreed he's going to give an update on the homeless planning for the unhoused in Berkeley. And Peter, I don't know if you have a PowerPoint or you're just going to speak without a PowerPoint, or because I can make you a co-host and we can share screen, but you let me know how you'd like to go forward.
Yeah, let's do that. Thank you. I've got a brief PowerPoint
Okay.
that'll just kind of guide the conversation.
Great. So you're now co-host, so you can share a screen. Thank you for coming, and I apologize. We had this full agenda, and I'm so sorry it's taken so long. Thank you for joining us on Saturday.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Okay, folks, I hope can see this PowerPoint.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, thank you. I don't have too much. I'll try to be brief. I don't have too much longer than 11:45. I've got some plans this afternoon that I've got to sort of pivot towards, but I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and good to see some familiar faces and names. My name is Peter Radu. I work in the city manager's office. I oversee our neighborhood services division, which includes a number of units, including our homeless response team. And I also am serving as an interim deputy director in our health, housing, and community services department, specifically kind of supporting our environmental health team, as well as homeless policy and budgeting there. So I've got a good bird's eye view of homelessness in the city of Berkeley, and happy to answer any questions. What I wanted to do today was to kind of focus on the homeless response team and what we're doing around encampments and unsheltered homelessness, because I know that is the issue that is first and foremost the biggest sort of crisis from a humanitarian standpoint on our streets. It's also the biggest impact to our neighbors, and so I imagine it's of great interest to you all. So this is a quarterly update that we do. The most recent went out in an off-agenda memo to the council earlier this week, and I'm happy to, when I'm done with my talk, drop the information in the chat if you guys want to visit that. The homeless response team is the interdepartmental team led by neighborhood services that does two things. First and foremost, our goal is to respond to unsheltered homelessness and to navigate people out of unsheltered homelessness into shelter, housing, and other resources, but then to also manage our streets and to manage the health and safety impacts of encampments, both to the people living within them as well as to their neighbors. In July of 2021, the City Council adopted a regional strategic plan, which is our sort of guiding light for our efforts on the street and our efforts to deal with homelessness. It committed the city of Berkeley to a very dramatic, and at the time I thought Pollyannish, quite frankly, vision, but one that was worth working towards, which is a 75% reduction of street homelessness in 3 years. And while we have not met the 75% reduction in 3 years, the most recent point in time count data came out a few weeks ago, and we did achieve a 45% reduction in street homelessness since 2022, which is remarkable. And we're down now 2 consecutive point in time counts from 2019, which, when you think about the impacts of the pandemic and everything that did to our homeless population and just our broader economy and housing situation, that's a very remarkable achievement. And I think we definitely have a lot more work to do. I definitely know that many of you individually are being impacted by encampments that remain, and I don't mean to minimize any of those very real impacts, but at the same time, I do think it is worth stepping back and noting that we are doing the right things and we are moving this needle in the right direction, and we've got to keep that momentum up. So the homeless response team holds ourselves to 3 outcomes, and that is what we're going to talk about in the slide today. So first and foremost is that our residents are sheltered, right? Our primary goal is to end homelessness through the provision of services. And I'll show some data to that effect later. Secondly, even if people are not interested or not ready for whatever reason to move into the resources that we have to offer them, or if we don't have resources to offer them, We want to make sure that dangerous encampments are not inevitable in our city. We prioritize minimizing health and safety impacts. And so even if an encampment can't be closed for lack of resources, we try to do our best to make sure that we're controlling the footprint and controlling the health and safety impacts of it. And third, and relatedly, is that our city is clean. We often know that encampments are, they don't have trash service. They can become magnets for illegal dumping. Things can sort of get out of control from a footprint standpoint very quickly. And so we want to make sure that we're mitigating that as much as possible. In terms of our first outcome, who are we serving? I think it's important, and I want you all to know that we are tentatively set for July 9th to go before the City Council with a broader update and set of analyses on our homeless system writ large. Who are we serving? How well are we doing? What sort of broad performance trends are we meeting and not meeting, and what the recommendations are? And so there will be a lot more opportunity to speak to some of these data in that presentation, in that context. But this is just to let you know that homelessness is disproportionately affecting Black and Indigenous populations, and this is true across the United States, and it speaks to just the racialized nature of housing discrimination and poverty. But that, the HRT, while we still have some work to do, is actually doing a better job of being equitable in terms of who we serve. So that's what that slide is. The similar here. So we are sort of closely approaching, we still have some work to do, of course, but in terms of the overall demographics of people accessing services for homelessness across Alameda County, you can see it's very disproportionately Black. And from that standpoint, we still have some work to do, but certainly better than we have been in the past. I think this slide is very important because this kind of underscores the context for how difficult it is to do the work that we do. We serve a disproportionately vulnerable population, even compared to people experiencing homelessness. I think these numbers speak for themselves, but also keep in mind, this is self-reported data, right? People don't tend to disclose in self-reports at a very high rate some of these problems, especially mental health and substance use problems. So the fact that 92% of folks or 83% of folks are volunteering this information, you can imagine that the true incidence rate is even higher than that. So this is an extremely vulnerable population. We are really, and I think it speaks to two things. One, how difficult it is to serve this population and to end homelessness for this population. They just have a number of barriers. And number two, I think it speaks to the fact that we really are prioritizing the most vulnerable and the most impacted. We are predominantly doing referrals to shelters. So while we want to make sure that people are connected to benefits and healthcare and all the things they need to thrive and to ultimately sort of put themselves in a stable place that will end their poverty and their homelessness, our primary goal is to get them off the street. Again, that 75% reduction in street homelessness means, first and foremost, let's get you indoors, and then let's figure out what we need to do from there to get you stabilized. And so that's the bulk of what we do on the street, is referring people to shelter. Overall, we're keeping track of our acceptance rate at shelter. And when you look at this slide, it's not very, it would seem to indicate that we're not doing a very good job, right? But I think the key word here is congregate. This is old school shelter. This is the cot in the room, shared common spaces, et cetera. I think the pandemic shone a very bright light on the fact that that's not a very, for a variety of reasons, good solution to a disproportionately vulnerable and disproportionately disabled population. And so when we offer these congregate resources, we don't see a very high uptake rate. But in the past several years, we have doubled down. In fact, between 2021 and 2023, we tripled the number of non-congregate shelter beds that we had. These are like leased motels, or in the height of the COVID pandemic, using these emergency trailers. that offer some people the privacy of a locked door, right? And the ability to have their own space. And when we're offering that in the course of an encampment closure, acceptance rates jump up to over 4 in 5. So that's a very successful model for us to continue to build on. I think this is the most important outcome of all. 2/3 of the people that we are serving. And what I mean by serving is more than just talking to them on the street for 5 minutes. These are the folks with whom we are trying to develop a sustained relationship. We can't work with everyone on the streets. My homeless response team in neighborhood services has 2 outreach workers serving the entire city. So we just cannot do the entire city, right? And so we focus based on where the priorities are. But for those folks with whom we are doing sustained outreach, 2/3 of them are exiting homelessness or exiting street homelessness anyways, either directly to emergency shelter or to permanent housing. And as I mentioned earlier, this is driving, I think, the headline measure, which is that we saw a 45% decrease in our unsheltered homeless population over the past 2 years, even while the county saw a much more modest decrease, and our neighboring city to the south, Oakland, saw an increase, even though it was a smaller increase than they've seen in years past. I think this is important. Street homelessness tends to disproportionately impact the historically redlined areas of Berkeley. That is because these areas of Berkeley tend to be disproportionately less white and less affluent. And as we saw in earlier slides, homelessness is disproportionately less white and less affluent. And so it makes sense that folks who have ties to these areas are more likely to experience marginal housing and street homelessness. In response, we are targeting the bulk of our work to the historically redlined districts in Berkeley. And you can see that West and South Berkeley have gotten 80% of the interventions that we have done. And we have performed 109 encampment interventions since we launched this program in September of 2021. We are averaging over 2 notices per business day. So we are out there on the streets every single day working with people. And what do I mean by notices? These are courtesy notices of violation, right? One of our goals, like I said, dangerous encampments are not inevitable and that our streets are clean. We want to give people the opportunity to comply before we lead. We don't lead with enforcement. We don't lead with the police. We lead with service provision, and we lead with a path to compliance. And so we're out there providing courtesy notice to people, letting them know that they're in violation of certain rules and giving them the opportunity to comply. And so we're out there doing this work every single day. And I like this statistic because it kind of gives you a sense of the volume of work that's being done leading up to a more formal encampment intervention. And I think oftentimes that is invisible to the broader public, right? Is the work that we are doing on a daily basis, just talking to people and getting them to be educated and building that trust and building that rapport, and also figuring out kind of what makes certain individuals tick. There's not many people on the streets of Berkeley that my team doesn't know by name and have some idea of what their history and what their general orientation towards working with us is. As I mentioned, we've done over 109, and in fact, that's probably an undercount because I think we've done some this week as well. Encampment closures to date, encampment interventions to date, including an encampment closure, deep cleanings. This is when we don't have to close an encampment, but when we want to control the footprint, and RV closures, which can include towing and removing vehicular encampments. And I like this slide a lot because this is, to our third outcome, that our city is clean. You're seeing the tonnage, or the pounds rather, that are being removed going down precipitously quarter over quarter, year over year. And you do see some seasonality there that fluctuates with the summer months, which is to be expected. The weather is warmer, more people are outside, but generally speaking, the trend is in a direction that is that correlates with what we're seeing in our pit count data. Fewer people are on the streets, more people are in shelter, and therefore there are fewer encampments that have a giant footprint that need debris removal, and therefore less pounds of debris to be removed. So in that regard, I think we are moving in the right direction, and our data are bearing that out. I want to acknowledge we have a lot more work to do. as I said at the top of this, many of you I have been in communication with, and I know about the encampments that are impacting you. I know about the encampments that have been there for many years, and I'm happy to answer questions about any of them. I'm happy to answer questions about what our plans are, what our future efforts are. I know we have a ton more work to do, and that this effort is not done. Like I said, though, I think we have made some progress, and I think that is 100%, well, not 100%, but largely, when you compare ourselves to our neighbors, largely due to the generosity of the voters and the taxpayers in Berkeley. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that. So thank you, and appreciate the opportunity to be here. I can answer any questions you may have. I know I didn't talk about our broader homeless system, but fire away and I can try to be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that presentation, Peter. And we're going to alternate between, we got questions in the chat and then we have some people with their hands raised. So the question in the chat is a more specific one is was the rule against overnight camping in parks changed? Why is there camping on the Ohlone Greenway and the Coternesis Park paths now?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. No, the rules have not changed. What has changed is that in the last several years, there's just been a myriad of federal case law that dictates when you can and cannot enforce those rules. And generally speaking, there are two sets of case laws that have come down, one around the 8th Amendment and one around the 14th Amendment. The 8th Amendment rulings broadly, sort of as a category, state that you cannot enforce any sort of anti-camping ordinance or overnight sleeping ordinance or things of that nature unless people have some alternative place to be, some affirmative, permitted alternative place to be. Generally, that is interpreted to mean some indoor shelter space. And so if we don't have indoor shelter to offer people, we cannot enforce those rules. And that is not just some vague theoretical risk. That is a very real risk. My team is actually dealing with 3 federal lawsuits right now pursuant to 8th Amendment claims. So if we are brazen and careless about how we deal with that, we will be sued, and that is an enormous waste, in my opinion, of the taxpayer dollars. The other set of rulings is around the 14th Amendment, and that specifically has to do with people's belongings and their stuff. And generally speaking, folks are entitled to advance notice if we are going to discard or store their belongings, and some sort of storage option. We don't have to store everything, but we have to be clear about what our policy is. And our storage capacity right now and our budget to acquire additional storage space is very, very severely constrained right now. And so just because of the overall shelter shortage and just lack of capacity to deal with storage, we are not able to enforce those rules uniformly. And so what we do instead is we prioritize complaints coming in based on the nature of the impacts, the number of, and just the sort of the number of health and safety violations and concerns that we're seeing. And that's an imperfect science, and things are fluid, and we do our best to triage. And I acknowledge that there's always room for improvement, but that's an answer to your question. The rules have not changed, but federal case law trumps local ordinances, and that's that.
Thank you. Tony, you have a question?
Yes, I have 2 questions, Peter. First, my deepest respect, sincere appreciation for doing what is definitely the hardest job in city government. And you do a remarkably good job. And we thank you for it. And also your transparency and willingness to answer our questions. Here are my 2 questions. You know what they're going to be. Number 1, what happens to Berkeley's policies when the Supreme Court overturns Boise in the Grants Pass lawsuit? Mm-hmm. And that is definitely going to happen. We have a very conservative Supreme Court. Number 2, what is being done to implement a pump out program for the RVs and to monitor how they are disposing of human waste? Mm-hmm. I mean, the RVs are a terrible problem even at the shelter, when the 742 Grayson was open, there were 2 fires in the RVs. And so it's terribly difficult, I know, to monitor what's going on with the RVs, but I'm very concerned with the water quality in the drainage system, which ends up in Aquatic Park. So could you answer those 2 questions? I know they're very complex.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. Yes, and 2 very good questions. I think with respect to your first question, we don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do. I think you're probably right to guess that given the composition of the court at present, we can expect some degree of rolling back or some degree of deferring back to states' rights, if you will. We just don't know exactly what the ruling is going to be. They could throw it out altogether. They could send it back to the lower courts to re-adjudicate it. We just don't know. And so I think it's a little bit too soon to start calling specific plays from the playbook, if you will. We got to see exactly what is handed us. But broadly speaking, I can tell you this. Even if in a world where these Eighth Amendment protections are rolled back by the Supreme Court, I frankly don't see the city of Berkeley changing drastically our approach to dealing with homeless encampments. And I'll tell you that for 2 reasons. One, what we are doing is in line with the federal best practices and recommendations coming from the federal government on how to deal with encampment homelessness and how to balance, even if they're not constitutionally court protected rights anymore, human rights of people who are disabled on the street, have no other options, right? And so I think we in Berkeley are just far ahead of the curve. In fact, the federal government reaches out to us and asks us to review their draft guidance before they promulgate it to the rest of the country. They know we're at the tip of the spear here in terms of just leading the way, as Berkeley historically has done, and I think in this issue should continue to do. So I don't see, quite frankly, a dramatic departure from this service first, care first, jails last, if you will, approach to street homelessness. I don't think that's what the values of the Berkeley population want to see. And so what I do think is that for certain encampments or for certain individuals for whom we have offered 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 chances, and they still continue to decline us and they still continue to be public nuisances, then we may have more tools in our toolbox in terms of enforcement. That's what I'll say at this point in time. I think right now the status quo is such that even for those folks, it is very difficult to enforce. And depending on what the Supreme Court does, that may open up some more options for us. But I don't anticipate a wholesale change in the way that we do this work. I just don't think that's what Berkeley wants to see. Folks on this call can tell me if you think I'm wrong. And with respect to your second question, and I will say this also about the Supreme Court, they are dealing with the Eighth Amendment. They are not dealing with the 14th Amendment. So all of the case law protections around people's stuff will remain. And that is, in my opinion, as big, if not in certain instances, a bigger thorny problem that my team has to navigate, right? Because oftentimes it's not the person, it's the stuff and the degree of sprawl and footprint. And that is not being adjudicated by the court at this time. And so I don't want to see this Supreme Court ruling as a panacea, and I don't think anybody should. I think it could just give us a few more options to deal with particularly obstinate or problematic individuals that refuse our service. And so that's that. With respect to the RV pump out, I just think I will say this. We received a modest amount of money from the city council to sort of stand up and pilot something. And we put that out to bid in our request for proposals for our community agency funding, which generally speaking is the way that we sort of bid out our homelessness and anti-poverty work here in the city through our Health, Housing, and Community Services Department. We do that every 4 years. When the council approved this funding in the last budget cycle, a couple months thereafter, we were launching our RFP. And so we decided to put it into our RFP to see who might respond to it. Nobody bid on it. And so we did not have any respondents to that project, which means two things. One, for the immediate future, because we've got to get that budget passed in the next 3 weeks here, and we've got to get those contracts stood up. Our first priority is going to be to contract out the services for which we did receive bids and to get that squared away. After that, we're going to turn our attention to perhaps finding a way to sole source and reach out to individuals. We do have, or I'm sorry, individual organizations. We do have a shelter crisis ordinance that the city council has had in effect since 2016, which gives the city manager some broad authority to reach out and sole source contracts where needed to respond to the homeless crisis. And I think that this particular issue may be something that falls within that authority. And so once we sort of get this budget behind us and get the contracting underway, I anticipate in the second half of this year, we will roll our sleeves up and start working on that. If I had double the staff that I have, we would be working on both things in parallel. But unfortunately, that's just not in the cards right now. So definitely it is on our to-do list. Our to-do list is long, and I wish we had more people to get to more of it.
Thank you, Peter. So again, I'm so sorry, everybody. We're running really late. We have another presenter. And so we have time for 2 more questions. I'm going to go with people who haven't already been called on. That's Willie and Dietmar. So if you guys could just ask your questions quickly, and then we have to thank Peter and move on because Lisa from the Department of Insurance is here to talk to us as well. So go ahead, Willie.
Thank you, Peter, for showing up, first of all. I'm going to be the bad guy in this particular thing because many of the particular issues you brought up in terms of gentrification, redlining are based on race. It's based on structural particular issues that obviously I think most of us are aware of. But I'm just want to basically challenge you to basically do better than what you're doing now in terms of the accountability. Many of the particular agencies in which you are contracting with are not accountable. And I'm be happy to be able to talk to you about that. And certainly Paul Blake certainly has been doing a lot of work on that accord. But again, I would like to invite you to Friends of Adeline meeting as well, so that we can perhaps go into more detail on that. Again, thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Willie. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Willie. Dietmar, do you have a quick question? Because we do have to move on. So you'll be the last question.
No, that's fine. I'll just defer that for another time. Thank you.
Okay. Well, then I want to thank Peter Radula and thank you so much for coming in. And I hope that you're willing, as you see, obviously this is a huge issue for us and for everyone. So hopefully you'll be willing to come back again. Thank you for coming on a Saturday and talking with us. And if you could put your contact email in the chat again, there was a question about that. Somebody didn't see it. Thank you so much.
Yep.
And we really appreciate it.
Shoot me a note. I'm juggling a lot of messages right now, as you might imagine, but I'll do my best to be responsive. And thank you again for the opportunity. It's always good to just be in conversation about this and good to see some familiar faces as well. So happy Saturday, everybody.
Thank you, Peter, and we will want to invite you back. And thanks so much for coming by. Thank you.
All right, take care.
Thanks. And with that, we get to our final presentation. That's thanks to Shirley Dean. We're very lucky to have Lisa Strange here from the California Department of Insurance, who I'm now making a co-host because she's got a presentation for us about just the changes in insurance that we're all reading about and some of us are experiencing with the cancellation of our homeowners insurance. And so Lisa very graciously agreed to come talk to us about the strategy that the state of California is working on. Apparently, you're going to speak about this. Hopefully, I'm getting this right. The governor has asked the Department of Insurance to come up with a plan to address the changes in the insurance world in California by end of this calendar year. And so that's what Lisa and her department are working on. Hopefully, I got that right. And I'm going to turn it over to Lisa. And thank you again for coming and speaking to us.
Great, thank you. And can you hear me okay, Christopher?
Yes.
Okay, and you can see my screen as well?
Yes, we can see your screen, yes.
Great.
Could you speak a little louder, actually, if possible?
Yeah, how's that? Is that better?
Yes, there's a little echo, but we can hear you.
Shoot, okay. Well, thank you very much to Shirley and Christopher for inviting me to speak today. And as Christopher mentioned, I am going to share some updates on homeowners insurance and kind of where we are on fixing some of this crisis. So before I begin, I did want to just share a bit about the department. We are the consumer protection agency for the nation's largest marketplace. And all of our functions, including overseeing insurer solvency, licensing agents and brokers, resolving consumer complaints, and investigating and prosecuting insurance fraud, are to protect consumers. However, there is one thing that we cannot do, which is to require or compel insurance companies to sell insurance to a particular person or community. So, obviously, I think we're all very aware of the stress on the insurance market right now, created by lots of things, natural disasters, global inflation, and we're probably all aware as well that this is not just happening here, but every state's experiencing these factors. Things like increased costs of rebuilding, labor shortages, and as we've seen, as risk increases, insurance companies are protecting their obligations to current consumers and limiting new business. And so when they limit coverage because of major losses, whether it's wildfires or from some of the winter storms, it affects all of us, even some of us that might live in low risk areas. We all are finding it harder to get insurance. And I just wanted to give a quick California kind of context. And so when you look at our market, 12 insurance groups control 85% of the California insurance market. And since 2022, 7 of those top 12 groups have paused or restricted new business despite rate increases approved or pending with the Department of Insurance. So that just kind of goes to show that it's a little bit more than just the cost that is having these insurance companies pause on writing policies for us. And so because of that, we've been consistently monitoring and analyzing the status and the direction of these insurance availability trends. And we've been meeting up and down the state, been to every county talking to folks at meetings like this to really sort of learn what is the problem and what are folks experiencing. And we've done several things and are continuing to do some regulatory reform, and I'm going to get into some of that right now. So one thing I wanted to quickly talk about is the FAIR Plan. So the FAIR Plan is not a state agency, but rather a fire insurance pool comprised of all insurers licensed to conduct property and casualty business in California. And so it was actually created in 1968 after the Watts riots, when no one would insure homes due to that. And it was created as an insurer of last resort. However, with the state of everything, it's become the insurer of first resort for many of us. And so with so many folks on the FAIR Plan, the department and the FAIR Plan reached an agreement to increase some of the coverage limits. For example, when this commissioner took office in 2019, the amount that you could use the FAIR Plan for your dwelling coverage was 1.5 million. And now that is increased to 3 million. Similarly, with commercial properties, which would include things like HOAs, wineries, condominium groups, recreational youth camps, and things like that, their coverage limit was 8.4 million. And in November, that has been increased to 20 million per location. And it's also for business owners that need a business owner policy. That limit was also increased to 20 million. And so that's just one of the things that we've been working on to try to reduce some of that insurance gap. And additionally, kind of as I mentioned when I was sharing the department's mission, where we can't compel or make insurance companies write, I just want to make that kind of a critical fact, I guess, is that unlike public utilities, which, as we all know, are required to provide coverage to all residents and businesses, under Proposition 103, insurance companies can legally refuse to write insurance unless they are able to meet 100% of the consumer's claims, cover their expenses, and earn a fair return. And so, that's part of the reason that they've paused writing. And, all of us would be harmed if an insurance company goes insolvent because then it cannot pay its claims. So what is the department doing to make sure that does not happen? So, and I know that some of us aren't in a wildfire area, but I did just want to share this framework that we worked on in 2022 and it became effective in 2023, because it will tie in just a moment to the current strategy that Christopher mentioned came to us as an executive order from the governor. So in an effort to reduce the risk of some of the major losses that the industry has seen, we created the Safer from Wildfire framework. And as I said, this may not directly affect some of the communities that don't have wildfire risk, but this plan is really in place to increase safety and improve market conditions for all consumers through fewer home losses and really greater availability of insurance. And so I'm not going to go too much into it, but it is a 3-step system. And so there are some requirements to protect your home, your surroundings, and your community, which when those things are done, then it in turn provides you with a discount on your insurance and transparency about your risk rating. Now, this is very important because before this regulation, we knew that insurance companies assigned a risk score to our homes or businesses, but they weren't sharing that risk score with us because they were deeming it proprietary information. And now, through this regulation, they must not only tell you what your risk score is, but they also need to tell you what factors went into creating that score. And secondly to that, so once you've got your score, and there's a couple different companies that rate us. There's one called Fireline, and they rate on a system of 0 to 30. And there's another one called CoreLogic that rates on a system of 1 to 100. So once you get that score and you know what factors went into it, you have the right to appeal it. So if they gave you a high score and you know that you've done a lot of, created a lot of defensible space and done some mitigation to your home or property, you can appeal that score. And if you still don't agree with the outcome, then you would come to the Department of Insurance and let us try to help you figure that out. And when I'm done here, I'll have a screen up that gives our contact information so we can help with all of that. So again, this regulation went into effect in 2023, and we are seeing that more businesses and homeowners and communities are making these investments in wildfire safety, which is then creating a greater community resilience, reduced losses from wildfires, and more insurance coverage for some of those mitigated properties. So now let's get into the California Sustainable Insurance Strategy. And so this is part of the strategy that came to us last year from the governor as an executive order to get it done within 1 year. So we are aiming to do all of these things and more by December 2024. And so this is sort of an addition to the regulation that I just mentioned and the improvements that we've made to the FAIR plan. And it's important to note, this will be the biggest insurance reform since Proposition 103 was passed nearly, what's it been, 35 years ago. So we really need to begin operating in the 21st century. So a couple of the executive actions and reforms that we are taking through this strategy are, one is to increase availability of insurance in wildfire distressed areas. And so using our prior approval rate authority, insurance companies will begin writing no less than 85% of homes and businesses in wildfire distressed areas. And this is a historic agreement between the department and insurance companies. And this will really reverse the trend of the growing FAIR plan and close that insurance gap. Secondly, we will return FAIR plan policyholders back to traditional insurance, with first priority given to the hardened homes and businesses following that Safer from Wildfire regulation that I just mentioned. And that's really important because those of us that have been or are on the FAIR plan, we know it's a very bare bones policy and it's expensive. And to then have all of the protections of a traditional home insurance policy, you know, many of us buy what we call like a wraparound policy to then get you kind of a whole coverage, and all of that's very expensive. So the goal is to make insurance more available through the traditional market. And so another way that we are going to do that is allow insurance companies to use forward-looking catastrophe models, which prioritize wildfire safety, mitigation, and transparency. Currently, the law only lets insurance companies use historical losses when rating our premiums. So that doesn't take into account any of the work that's been done, any of the fuel reduction, any of the prescribed fires, home hardening, or any of that. So through this new forward-looking CAT modeling, that will allow insurance companies to use that tool and increase their writing because they can better anticipate future losses, rather than just non-renewing high-risk policyholders or pausing writing altogether, which is what we're currently seeing. And then another important element to stabilizing the marketplace is to allow California-only reinsurance costs. So reinsurance is insurance for insurance companies, and it helps to insulate themselves from part of the risk of a major claims event. And so under this agreement, companies wishing to use these new risk assessment tools, like the CAT modeling and the California-only reinsurance costs, they must agree to maintain their writing in the wildfire distressed areas, which is that 85% requirement that I just talked about, which again increases the writing and removes people from the FAIR plan. And then finally, we will continue to modernize the FAIR plan. So earlier I mentioned that the commercial coverage limits for things like summer camps, condos, and HOAs was 20 million per location, which is, you know, 3 times what it was when this commissioner took office. However, that's still not enough. So through this strategy, we will increase those coverage limits to 20 million per structure. So that will even further close coverage gaps for those types of businesses and folks that are finding it hard to get coverage now. And as I said, all of this is in the works. There's several different regulations. The CAT modeling regulation is drafted. And then there's different, we've got another public hearing or public workshop coming up June 26th. And so that's really a place where the public and folks like you can participate and share comments on the topic at hand, which that one is CAT modeling. And I can send some information over or put some information in the chat on how you can participate in those hearings. So these things do take some time because it's a very transparent process, and we want to make sure everyone has the opportunity to share your thoughts and provide public comment. But as I said, we're on track to have all of this work done by the end of this calendar year. So I'm very, very excited about that. And before I end today, I just wanted to kind of share some of the online tools that are on our website to help folks really scour the marketplace in the event you've received a non-renewal notice or want to look for different home insurance or any kind of coverage. We regulate all lines of insurance. But for home, there are a couple tools for us. We have our top 10 tips for finding residential insurance, and that's just really a summary of information and options available to us. And additionally, we have what we call our home insurance finder tool, which can help us find insurance companies and the licensed agents or brokers that are appointed with them that have been identified to sell insurance in the zip code or the city that you plug in there using that tool. So it's very, very helpful. And then just lastly, as I was preparing for this meeting and talking with Christopher and Shirley, I was asked a question about surplus line carriers. So I wanted to just quickly share a bit of information on that. So essentially, the companies that we've all heard of, the big names, they are admitted carriers, which means they've met the requirements set forth by the Department of Insurance, and they are licensed where they operate, and they must file their rates with us. Admitted carriers are also required to participate in the California Insurance Guarantee Association, and we love acronyms around here, so that's CIGA. And so CIGA would step in and pay outstanding claims if an admitted carrier were to declare bankruptcy. And so in comparison, a non-admitted or a surplus line insurance company is a company that's licensed in another state or jurisdiction, just not in the insured's home state. So that means they're not required to follow the same state regulations. And it also means that their policies are not backed by CIGA. However, you might have some flexibility with a surplus lines insurance company, as they may allow you to get coverage for risks that might be complicated or not typically covered by admitted carriers at the moment. So what we're really telling folks is you can check with your broker to see if they're able to write a surplus lines policy. And if your broker doesn't know, perhaps they have, they know a broker who does have access to a surplus lines broker to help with that. So I just kind of wanted to share that little bit of information as well. And then just lastly, the department is always here to help answer questions about any line of insurance. As I mentioned, we regulate home, auto, life, a little bit of health. There's another state agency that regulates more of the health policies than us. But we're really just here to help answer those questions and guide you as you know, maybe before you go to buy your policy if you've got questions. And then when we receive questions about non-renewals, or you want us to sort of look at a specific, you know, your specific policy or your specific non-renewal, you would be asked to file a complaint or a request for assistance. We use the names interchangeably, so that we can write to the company on your behalf and obtain their renewal guidelines to see if the non-renewal is compliant with their own guidelines. So that's very important to know that, you know, please reach out to us and let us help make sure everything is, everyone's followed all the rules. And you can reach us again through our website. We've got a consumer hotline number from Monday to Friday, 1-800-927-4357. And we also have a live chat feature if you prefer to use that. And I think that's pretty much it. So I'm happy to take any questions or comments. And also just wanted to say that even when today is over, I'm still available. Both Christopher and Shirley know how to reach me. And again, you could also call our consumer hotline if you've got questions, you know, that come up beyond today. We're always here to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, very much. Actually, the only contact I have for you is your phone number. So I don't know if you want to put in an email address that's separate, or would you rather we just use the address you had in your PowerPoint? But if there is an email address that you can put in the chat, that would be helpful, whether it's yours or somebody else's. And with that, we do have some questions, and I want to go to, I think Bryce went away. So there's Kelly. Kelly, could you go ahead with your questions?
Yeah, this is real quick. Last night on Cron 4, they announced that State Farm would stay in California if the fire insurance was picked up by the FAIR plan. Could you comment?
Yes, I heard that too. And so what that kind of means is, so when I was speaking about the FAIR plan, I said that, so FAIR plan only covers, let me see, fire, hold on, I don't want to misspeak, fire, internal explosion, and smoke and lightning. And so, yes, so what State Farm is saying is if you buy your fire plan through the FAIR plan, well, that's a mouthful, your fire plan through the FAIR plan, then you could use them for the wraparound policy that I mentioned, which would be covering all of the other things that the FAIR plan doesn't cover. So, you know, theft, water damage, all those other things.
So we in effect would have, homeowners would have 2 homeowners insurance policies.
Correct.
Okay.
And many of us that are on the FAIR plan have that, which is why it's, I mean, FAIR plan alone just for the fire coverage is expensive. And then if we, you know, we're encouraging folks to buy what we call a wraparound policy or a difference in conditions policy, which covers all of the other things. And so if FAIR plan alone is expensive, you can imagine how expensive it is to also have that second policy. So that is why this strategy is so important, to really make insurance available for folks to get them off the FAIR plan, because it really was designed as an insurer of last resort.
Right.
And I think they've got, I don't know, 365,000 people that they're insuring right now. That's a lot. We've got to
Right.
get that changed.
So it seems like one of the goals of the plan is to lessen the restrictions on raising premiums, and that's what insurance companies are asking for, if I'm understanding correctly. So that's something that you all are looking at, is allowing, and that there is actually a question here that maybe feeds into that, is could the forward-looking insurance rates result in a rise in premiums as climate change and development patterns are analyzed? I assume that means by the insurance companies, not necessarily by your department, but as the insurance companies, and maybe by your department, look at how climate change and where development is occurring in areas that are most subject to hazard, will that become, they'll be able to use that in calculations working with your department in how, if whether they'll continue to provide service and at what cost in premiums. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we're still working through the CAT modeling regulation, but I didn't say this, but current regulations already allow the use of catastrophe model for earthquake and fire following earthquake exposure. And so we're already doing that. So what we're trying to do is expand it to other catastrophic insurance losses. And it will, we feel like that the insurance consumers will have more reliable costs than under the current regulations, because the insurance companies will be better able to anticipate future losses, rather than just abrupt decisions to non-renew or pause writing. So because the CAT models will capture all the efforts taken by federal, state, local governments, property owners, communities, utility companies that are mitigating the exposure to catastrophic events. So, you know, that's sort of the purpose of having these forward-looking tools versus just using all the historical losses from like currently, which we've been doing for far too long, about 35 years.
Great, thank you. And then we are over time, but I don't know how long people want to stay, but we have a couple more people with their hands raised. So Paula?
Yes, thank you. So, and thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting. So last month, the Alameda County District Attorney filed a lawsuit against Farmers Insurance and some subsidiaries because alleging that although people may have insurance, the way the insurance is being, if someone loses their home, it turns out that they're not covered to actually replace their home, and that the insurance companies are using a scheme that doesn't look at the individual home, but it's based on the zip code. And so people are basically underinsured. Do you have any comment about that the way the insurance companies are actually protecting people and not apparently or allegedly not covering people exactly for their home? Hope that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. I've not heard about the lawsuit, so I can't comment on that. But what I do hear when I go to different community events is, and I heard this a lot, I'm also assigned to the town of Paradise, which we're all familiar that they just had their 5-year, I guess they're about 5.5 years post-Camp Fire. And many of those folks were underinsured. And so they didn't receive enough money to rebuild. So many haven't rebuilt. So they've got the land where their home was, and instead of rebuilding a home, they took the little bit of insurance money they got and bought maybe an RV and put it there. So we do hear a lot about folks being underinsured. And so we're trying to, I guess, educate and share with people to really look over your policy with your broker and make sure you've got enough to rebuild in the area where you live or somewhere else based on today's inflated prices. So, I mean, that's really all I can comment on about that. We kind of do some disaster preparedness, if you will, presentations, and that's kind of one of the things that I like to cover is really do an insurance tune-up, right? So make sure you've got enough in your policy, but also make sure you have taken sort of a home inventory of the things in your home in the event maybe you do suffer a total loss. Have you gone around and just videoed everything in your home, opened drawers and got pictures of the special jewelry, the antiques, and all those things that you will want covered in the event, sadly, you were to face a total loss. And then store that video in the cloud or something. It used to be that we would fill out a book of all the things, you know, I've got 6 beds, I've got, you know, all this stuff, and then we would store that book in our home. Well, if you suffer a total loss, that book is gone too. So we're really trying to kind of get away from paper and kind of store stuff in the cloud if you can. We also want to make sure that folks are storing a copy of your policy somewhere else, not just at your house. Because again, if you suffer a loss, the policy's gone too. I mean, you can get another copy, but that all just takes time. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but that is kind of, you know, sadly what we're seeing. Again, I can't comment on the lawsuit, but many folks are uninsured, and we need to really work with your agent and broker and get that insurance tune up, make sure you've got enough coverage to rebuild.
Thank you very much. Excellent response, though. And I did put a link to the lawsuit in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
To the press release. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you both. Steve?
Does the FAIR plan take everybody?
Yes. The only people that they cannot take, to my understanding, is if you are growing cannabis on your property.
Not doing that.
Good.
Oh, then they can take you. Great.
Can I just quickly follow up on the State Farm? So
yes.
Are all policies wraparound for State Farm or only high risk areas, those people who were going to be canceled?
Oh, that's a good question, Kelly. And I don't know. And rather than answer incorrectly, let me look into that. And if I may, I'll circle back with Christopher to get that answer to you, or you could put your email in the chat and I'll reply directly to you after I research that, if I may.
Okay, thank you.
If I could ask one more question.
Yes, then we need to let Lisa go, but yeah, thank you.
That might be of interest to this group. I believe I have read that insurers are canceling people because their area is too dense.
Yeah.
And that just seems to go against what the city is doing and what the state is doing.
Yes. We talked about that a little yesterday, Lisa, that people in Berkeley are getting, there are people in the hills where there have been fires in the past, and then there are people in the flatlands who assume that they're not in a high fire risk area, but they're being denied extension of their coverage, renewal of their coverage, and they're getting the rationale being that their area is too dense. And this is a time when the state is directing communities like Berkeley to further densify our neighborhoods, which is separate, not your agency, but it's the housing department agency is telling Berkeley and other communities to increasingly densify. So on the one hand, Berkeley is densifying, but then insurance companies are saying, oh, you in West Berkeley, you don't live in the hills, so we're not worried about forest fires, but your neighborhood's too dense. And so we're gonna cancel your policy. So I don't know if your agency is looking at how urban people living in densely populated urban areas are going to continue to receive insurance, and maybe it's the same answer through the fair, as you just talked about, the wraparound or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and thank you for that question. Thank you for the question and comment. And we are hearing about that, and that is something that we're definitely looking into as well. And just for purposes of today, while we're still working on all of these solutions, if you receive a non-renewal notice, you know, make sure you received your wildfire, your risk score, because they need to tell you what factors went into creating that risk score. And also we're telling folks, if you receive a non-renewal notice, ask your broker or your insurance company, all right, I see that you're going to cancel me in 75 days, because by the way, they need to give you 75-day notice. That's one rule. And you can ask them, what could I do to maybe have you not non-renew me? What could I do to have you keep me? You know, and see what that looks like. And then third, please feel free to remember to give us a call and let us, you know, we can reach out to the company on your behalf, get a copy of their underwriting guidelines, make sure they follow those. Not here to bash insurance companies, but it's a fact that they're a for-profit business, right? And so we just want to make sure that they're following the laws and the rules that they have in place, and that they follow their own guidelines. And so, and really encouraging folks, like I said, to reach out to us, because we can help. And secondly, another, you know, kind of reason to reach out to us is because that's how we learn what the communities are hearing. That's how we learn that they're being non-renewed in dense neighborhoods as well. I was sharing with Christopher yesterday, I had the opportunity to speak to the Golden Gate Heights Neighborhood Association. And same thing, dense neighborhood, non-renewals. And, you know, they were like, what are we going to do? What can we do? The homes are built, they're here, you know? And so again, we really want to hear from you when that's happening, so we know that that's part of the packet of solutions that we need to work toward. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I actually, I don't know if there's any more questions, and I just want to respect your time, Lisa. There was a concern about people being told they need to clear their fuel reduction, and I think this is not your department, but Virginia writes, I read something alarming about fuel reduction requesting homeowners to basically remove trees unless they own giant lots. Trees are needed to mitigate warming, so that there's a connection to the whole climate emergency, as well as, on the one hand, we need our trees to process the GHGs, and then people are being told to cut them down for fire hazard. So I don't know if that's something that your department is looking at as well, is considering.
Yeah, and oh gosh, that's so tough. And I can imagine it is for your community as well. And then we especially hear it when we are speaking to folks with some acreage up in the hills, because they will tell us, I moved up here because I want this look. And now you're telling me I need to take down all of this beauty. That's the reason I moved up here. And it's hard. So what the Safer from Wildfire ground up approach is it's the 3 layers of protection that I just kind of briefly breezed through, which is really to protect your home or business, protect your surroundings, and protect the community. And part of doing that, a couple of the things for like protecting your home are, things like a 5-foot ember resistant zone around the structure, non-combustible 6 inches from the bottom of your walls, dual pane windows, enclosed eaves, things like that. But then as we move to the second piece of that framework, that regulation, it's protecting your surroundings. And that's where they want you to protect, the 5 feet zone around your home, but then also clear things up to 30 feet if you own that much property around your house, clear decks and, all that kind of stuff. And I know that's hard for folks. And so I think the goal really is to make us safer from fires, and kind of, I guess, decorate with hardscape, which is hard. And so I don't really have a good answer for that, but that is part of what insurance companies are looking at when they are deciding to non-renew us.
Thank you. And I want to be very respectful of your time. We have one more question, and I don't know, I want to respect your time when you need to go, and you've given us a lot of time. All right, you're okay. Thank you so much. So Bryce, go ahead with your question.
Just pointing out, we have a Berkeley specific issue of a fair number of RV fires and arson fires that are Berkeley specific, Berkeley and North Oakland. And the impact of that, one of the things we didn't ask Peter about, but there was a program to do some fire safety work inside RVs. And so we've got some other sources, sort of non-traditional sources that we in Berkeley not a state issue, but a local issue that we should be keeping track of.
Okay, so it doesn't sound like that's something for Lisa then, maybe more for the city of Berkeley, I guess.
Well, I mean, the question is really whether that's going to get significant to the point where it begins affecting us locally in terms of non-renewals. If we've got arson fires, you know, at what point can the insurers then begin blacklisting areas around those fires? Are they prohibited from doing that, or can they look at that specifically and change our rates?
And I don't know yet, Bryce. That's a great question. Can I do like I'm gonna do with Kelly and look into that and circle back with you? That be okay? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And with that, I think unless somebody's got an urgent question, I think we want to wrap this up and respect Lisa's time, and thank you so much for coming today to share this with us. It's an issue obviously of great interest to a lot of people on the call, and good luck with the strategy that you're preparing, and we are going to be hearing more, and maybe, like I've said to everybody else today, maybe we can invite you back. I don't know if that would be November, December or something, to talk about the strategy once you finalized it. I may have missed something that you talked about that.
Where Shirley lives, wouldn't she be more vulnerable?
Anyway, so anyway, thank you, and maybe you could come back at another time. But thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say absolutely. And as I mentioned, you know, even though my time today is coming to an end, I'm still a resource for you. We're kind of divided into regions up here. There's 3 of us that do Northern California outreach. And I think I was sharing with either Shirley or Christopher that your outreach representative is actually a lovely gal by the name of Mary Beth Bykowski. However, she's already at an event today, so I'm here speaking on her behalf. But between us, we are always available to help beyond just today. So just because my time is coming to an end today doesn't mean we're not still a resource for you. So please feel free to reach out. Oh, and let me put my email address in the chat so you can reach out to me.
And can you put Mary Beth, is that her name? Or her name as well, so we know that she really is the person we should be contacting?
Yes.
And we appreciate you stepping in for her on this call. Thank you.
No problem. Our pleasure. And so yeah, just please reach out to us. And then if you have a specific question about a policy or you receive a non-renewal and need our assistance, please let us know.
Thank you. Again, thank you so much for coming on your Saturday to join us. We appreciate it so much. And with that, thank you. And
thank you.
And I think we are going to call this meeting to a close. This is
Chris, I would like to make a comment first.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, maybe about the website.
Yes.
I forgot. Please, Dean, go ahead, Dean. Sorry.
Yeah, for those of you who are still here, just a reminder, we have a new website which is up now, and I encourage you to go there. We actually have posted the BioLab in Berkeley thing from Zelda on it, and I'm posting things every day. But if you have things you want posted on it, please contact me or send it to the BNC, and I will then post it on the website. I'm also looking for photographs of your neighborhood, so please send me anything you want to post on the website, and go take a look at it. We got all the neighborhood organizations listed there, and if yours is there without any information on it, please get it to me so I can put it up there. Thank you.
So we get a request for what email address to send that to, Dean? Any requests?
I'm sorry, Chris?
What email address do you want people to send requests to?
I'll just send it to the bnc50@berkeley-neighborhoodscouncil.com.
Great. All right, thanks everybody. We went way over. We had a huge agenda, as you saw, and there was some question as to whether one of the presentations was going to happen or not, and it did. So it was very full and packed, and thank you for bearing with us and going way over time. And please join us for our next meeting, which might be shorter, which is August 8th. We will not have a July meeting. We're taking a break for the month of July, but we'll be back. Well, I'm sorry, is it August? It's August 10th. August 10th, the second Saturday. So we'll see you again then. And thank you all very much. And with that, I'm going to stop the recording, and this meeting the June meeting is done. Thank you very much.